Wow, and hello. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Let me add Steven. The whole Blazor team's here. Damian Edwards is here. It's a big one. Hi, friends. So I talked Dan into doing this is .NET, this is what's new in .NET 5 for Blazor, and I talked Dan into, this is the world premiere. I don't know how I did it.
That's right.
So
an early preview, special preview.
That's right. Okay, I'm just checking the audio's looking good. Okay. Awesome. Wow. So, gosh. Well, so I think everyone has been on before except for McKinnon. And McKinnon, you're an intern on the team, right?
Yep, that's correct.
That is so cool. So,
Extraordinaire.
So we have a packed show with tons of demos. Let me see. I'm looking and seeing. Okay, we've got.
What has happened to the community stand-up when we have an agenda? I blame you, Dan.
Goodness.
I mean, what on earth is going on? This is far too organized.
Basic planning,
Basic planning. Basic planning is I put pants on this morning before I got on the call. What is this, an agenda?
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
This is very slick, I have to say. This is the first time I've seen this new platform that we're using for this, and I can see all of us in the Brady Bunch style thing going on here. It's looking really good.
Yeah,
we're all next to each other, we can.
I know.
I feel like I almost reach out
here and see Dan, and I can look here and John, and down here is Safia.
I can do this. This is I can. Woo! I can do so many things. Yeah.
You're gonna make everyone dizzy now.
Dramatic zoom out has just gone into the 2020s now. This is
yeah, we're way past that.
Awesome.
So it's funny with the timing because we found this platform. And then we did some tests with it. We did some. We're also doing these virtual user groups, and so user groups are have through .NET Foundation. We have access to this too. And then we showed it around. We're like, this is it. We're all in. And then Scott was like, that's not that's it's like 720p or something. It wasn't 1080p. And then we're like, oh no, back to the drawing board. And like that week, they're like, now announcing we have 1080p support.
Yay!
Yeah, so it was good timing.
Very
awesome. Good. Okay, well, I have some community stand-up links because
John loves community.
It's all true. Okay, I'm doing this a better way this time. I'm using sharing application. So potentially, my Teams notifications won't pop up on the screen.
Wow!
I don't know.
Roll down the side. We're not hiding anymore.
I know.
I can't make faces as you're talking about things now because everyone can see me.
I am, by the way, I'm using this. I don't know if you see. Yeah, you don't see it now. But I am using the side tabs, which is kind of wacky. It's Yeah, have you folks seen this?
It's not the same if I can't see your insanely condensed 1 pixel width tabs.
Right. And it does seem actually that it's not updating. Let me remove and add it back to the stream. Oh, I think I'm sharing the wrong one. Mini monitors, many things. Okay. Share screen. My goodness. I am trying my best to make everyone dizzy. This is share application window, and I want to share the one that has them across the top. I'm just sharing my screen. Heck with it. Wonderful. Okay. The thing I was starting to say earlier, but sharing the wrong thing, is it has the side tabs now. You seen this? This is a mini tabs going crazy thing, and you can share them all in here. So let's see. I will pin this. As always, we have the. I shared these out at the end, so people always ask, and yes, this URL list gets shared in the links and all that. So. First of all, I wanted to mention this. So Scott Addy called this out. We've been doing a lot of cloud native stuff lately on Community Stand-Up, or just .NET in general, right? We had .NET Conf, and then we also had last week Community Stand-Up with Project High stuff. So this is neat to see. This is in the Learn stuff, and it's a course going through, and it's looking at resiliency in cloud native applications. So. These are cool. These Learn modules are really kind of a lot of, nice bite-sized 10 minutes-y kind of chunks, and they have, knowledge checks and interactive stuff and everything. So Very cool. All right, Rick Strahl. Amazing blog post as always from Rick. So here he is talking about shipping something using a .NET Global tool. And what he's done is he's got this live reload server that he built. And so now it's time to share it out to the world. And he just is like, hey, there's global tools. People kind of forget about global tools or don't know the best practices and stuff. So he kind of, he talks about how to use them. He does point out that you do need the core SDK to install. And then, talks about just, the general things. Here's the walkthrough of how to do it, how to ship a global tool and stuff. So anyhow, this is cool. And then he kind of wraps up towards the end with talking about some that make sense for ASP.NET developers specifically. So there's of course, and this is neat too, like running on another platform like Linux with WSL and stuff. So the ones he talks about is his live reload server. He's also got a snippet converter thing that he uses and is shared as a global tool. This HTML packager, which is neat. So packing up HTML assets and stuff, and his live reload server. So anyhow, as always, Rick, amazing blog post and very cool stuff. All right. Somebody got really quiet and then loud again. I'm not sure. Somebody has some background noise happening. So this is cool. This is from Michael Washington, and he's got a blog post on the way, but I just had to share it along with the Blazor team we've got here. So this is Blockly.
Oh.
Yeah, look at this. So it is
Scratch programming in Blazor.
Yeah, isn't this cool? So like here, he's got it hooked up to a model, like, and it, you can go through and it'll executes this. I just think this is amazing. Calm is walking and attacked is running. So yeah,
nice,
neat stuff. So
nice job, Michael.
Yeah, and this whole Blockly programming model is just really cool. So yeah. And Michael, I just, like I like to call people out that are doing awesome stuff for years and years. Michael's been, just his Blazor help website is cool. He's been cranking out just great content. Here he's got another thing in here that's he has Blazor projects on GitHub and he wants them to show as C# and not as like other, HTML or whatever. And so he points this out. So yeah, cool stuff. Alrighty. Two things on integration testing. First of all, Steve Gordon has a new course out on Pluralsight on integration testing with ASP.NET Core. So this is best practices and just explaining differences with unit testing, all the stuff, including testing APIs and things. And then also a specific blog post here, Bharat, talking about integration testing using snapshots. And so walking through, explaining, again, the differences. A neat thing, I think, in his post is he talks about using a Docker-based approach as compared to in-memory. And, specifically how you can get a really good integration test using that. So it's, reproducible and, a full thing using things like, Postgres and et cetera. It's your full kind of dependency management stuff. So cool. All right. So now we're into some more Blazor stuff. This is, pretty quick one from Gerald and just talking about disabling double form submission. So, form element, here he's just got disabled equals is submitting and just setting that. So on submit, he just, can escape out, and otherwise setting this is submitting, and that'll disable the form element. So
setting a little Boolean flag. That's all you need.
There you go.
Yep, it works.
Yep. Yeah. So, alrighty. This is a series I've mentioned before, and I just want to, repeat it because David keeps kicking these out. This is a series on Blazor game development. And so for people, especially that learn visually, and also he's doing a lot of stuff with JS interop. He's using Canvas for this. So, here's his here's his thing, and we've got a lot of running sprites in this week's community stand-up. So here's got to show that off. So just talking about handling button states and then changing the sprite. These are all, he's up to number 8 now, and they're all pretty quick, just a few minute read. So very kind of slowly building up through these. So nice stuff. All right. So this is interesting. Mikhail, he's writing about this plugin framework, and it works on a lot of different platforms. So it's across the .NET ecosystem. It's built on top of the DI system in .NET, and it has this plugin scanning system that works across all kinds of different stuff. So it's assemblies, but it's also NuGet packages, scripts, etc. So I looked in here at his Blazor one. Let me see how quickly I can hop over. Oh, there it is, right there. So he goes through, and in this one, he's got just a simple. Let me see if we go to Blazor. So he's got a widget in his index, and just binding into that widget. So he's got this injected widget, and then in his, so he's just calling, using that to show data, and in the startup, he just does a register. And so, it looks interesting. I think also a neat thing here is that it works with the ideas that you can write widgets that will work across a lot of different .NET stuff. So working across, like Forms apps and stuff. Yep. All right, and my last link to share. This is a pretty neat one, I thought, and I was interested in your folks' opinions. This is from John Hilton, and just kind of compare and contrast Blazor and Angular. A nice thing in here is if you're an Angular dev and want to understand Blazor, it's kind of like a Rosetta Stone approach. So he'll go through for the different things, and he'll say like, here is a, for instance, here's how you create a new Angular app. Here's how you create a new Blazor app. And then stepping through, looking at components, looking at, all the different things, passing data around and stuff. So just kind of, here's some code, and then writing the same code in Blazor. At the end of it, he does a thing where he talks about, pros and cons of both. And I felt like this, a thing he called out here is something I've always felt, is the shared data models. Being able to share your .NET code across front end and back end is a really nice thing. And so he does call that out. I was happy to see that. In general, for Angular pros, it's more around the lines of, it's well established, and so it's kind of been around for a while. Does definitely, from what I've felt, Dan, I worked with you a bit when I rewrote the Angular Tour of Heroes and updated that code for Blazor, I felt like all this stuff kind of like feels very real to me. Like there was just kind of it was a bit of I had to shift my mind back and forth, right? And it's like, oh, how are we doing routing now? How are we doing, oh, here's this TypeScript thing I'm not super familiar with, right? And so that is a lot of what he calls out in here. It's just kind of built, C#, built-in navigation, routing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's what Blazor's all about, right? It's trying to avoid that overhead of having to think and work in 2 different languages, like 2 different frameworks, 2 different tool sets. Just let you do one. I mean, you can do that with Angular too, but to do that with Angular, you'd be doing it in JavaScript. Like if you're happy writing JavaScript full stack, then you can avoid the overhead of the second language as well. But if you like .NET, and .NET is sort of your native tongue, if you will, then Blazor's great. Like Blazor lets you just use the language that use the skills that
Yeah, yep. So, and really, I think a lot of this that he calls out as cons is kind of fair, and it all really comes down to new, it's new, right? So like, new framework, and then like sizable initial download, although that's getting better over time and stuff, right? So, anyhow, I thought this was kind of nice, and again, the whole kind of, here's how you do data in Blazor, here's how you do it in Angular, here's how you do, forms, here's how you do forms, and just kind of the compare and contrast approach. So, And as always, I share these links out. I will put them in the chat. I will tweet them. I will mail them to you. I will fax them. And I am done. Hello, team.
Hello.
Hey.
We're still here.
Yeah. And Damien as well. Damien, how many watches today?
Oh man, you know what's so funny? I was just looking at my watch cabinet, whatever you call it, in my wardrobe yesterday, lamenting the fact I haven't worn a nice watch in about 4 months. I've just got my bloody Fitbit on. Look, I really should start wearing my watches again, just so I've got something else on this wrist, and there's something nice to look at when I look down at my hands when I can't find the key I want. No, I really should. I'm working at home. I just don't have any need to dress up a little bit.
There you go. Yeah.
But I should have done it just for you, John. I'll do it.
I should have pinged you.
Yeah.
So now you need to update. Isn't there that website? How many watches is Damien wearing?
Yeah.
Somebody...
Why does Damien wear 2 watches?
There it is.
And he could just say he doesn't right now.
He doesn't.
But I don't own the site. Someone else built it. So.
Oh boy. Okay, so we have a packed agenda. Dan he was very organized. He was very businesslike, and we've got everything is scheduled. I've already blown the agenda. I've talked too long. It's time for me to share Sophia's screen, I believe, and we jump right into development sprints.
Yes. So I wanted to share an update about Blazor's development sprints. We did the first of these sprints last month on July 16th. If you're unfamiliar with what a sprint is, it's basically a 24-hour virtual event where members of the community can contribute to Blazor, and the Blazor team is going to be available to help review PRs, talk through design, help you with your setup, all of the things that you need hands-on help with sometimes when you're contributing to open source. And the goal is really to get the community more involved with the project and get folks contributing and feeling like they can make Blazor what it is. So we held the last one on July. We had about 72 people who said they were interested in participating. We had 19 PRs submitted, and we had 12 PRs that were merged and are actually going to be shipping in .NET 5. In particular, they're going to be coming out in RC1. So it's super cool to see people, submitting PRs that actually get shipped. And if you are envious of that or just want to participate, we're going to be doing these regularly. The next one is going to be this Thursday on August 13th. And they're going to be happening every second Thursday of the month following that. If you think you're going to forget that, there's a calendar file that you can download if you go to aka.ms/Blazor-sprints. And then, of course, we'll be tweeting out about them and posting on Reddit and all of the different things. So yeah, join us. It'll be super fun, great learning opportunity, and just a fun way to dive into Blazor and learn a little bit more about the framework.
This is
it was
so
pretty cool.
Yeah.
To see how this went on the last sprint.
I'm sorry to interrupt there.
We're talking. No, I was just saying that it was we had one of these, and the contributions from the community were great. Like people were doing all sorts of stuff, and it was super fun to see what happens when we work together with the community. It was really great. I hope it's fun to see that we're going to continue doing this as an ongoing engagement.
And we shared this out on the community stand-up, and it was fun to see, like you said, all the pull requests, all the excitement and stuff. So this is, for people in the community, people watching on the chat and stuff now, definitely a great way to get involved and work directly with the team. How cool is that? So, wow.
All right.
Awesome.
Should we talk a little bit about .NET 5 now? I think I'm sharing my screen. Can you flip over to my screen, John? Great. All right.
There we go.
So today what we wanted to share with everyone was give a sneak preview of some of the things that we're working on in Blazor for .NET 5. .NET 5 for the Blazor team is kind of a compressed schedule for us, because we were working really hard on Blazor Server, and we shipped that in .NET Core 3.0, and then again with .NET Core 3.1 at the end of last year. It was about that time that .NET 5 was really starting to ramp up, but then we spent time through May working on Blazor WebAssembly, And that shipped at build just a couple months ago. So that's now available. And so we only really transitioned the Blazor teams to .NET 5 within the last couple months or so. And .NET 5's course is scheduled to ship by the end of this year. But even with that compressed schedule, we have a lot of good stuff, we think, that we're working on that we want to share with you. And we'll be talking about those things today. We have a bunch of folks from the Blazor team, of course, on the call that will be demoing their craftsmanship. Here's an overview of what's coming in the next preview of .NET 5. So .NET 5 right now is at preview 7, if you haven't been following along with .NET 5. And Blazor is in .NET 5, both Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. Blazor WebAssembly got inserted into .NET 5 for preview 6 and then updated again in preview 7. So both hosting models are there. We've been doing a large amount of work on Blazor WebAssembly to switch out the core framework libraries that Blazor WebAssembly uses. We were using the implementations from the Mono code base because Blazor was based off of the Mono runtime, Blazor WebAssembly. In .NET 5, we've been trying to kick off this big unification effort that was announced on the .NET blog, where we're trying to make .NET be one .NET instead of having all these different runtime implementations and framework library implementations. We wanted to unify on one. So we've been kicking that off with Blazor by replacing the Mono libraries with the .NET framework, .NET 5 core libraries. And that gives us a couple of things that allows us to target .NET 5 as our target framework. So you get an expanded API surface area in the .NET 5 timeframe, and we just get all the goodness of having that single implementation. So that work was pretty much done with preview 7, and it's been a little bit ongoing into preview 8 and future milestones as we work on our linker technology to make the app as small as possible, even though we're expanding the amount of functionality, trying to shrink it back down again so that it remains reasonable to download with your application. There's been a lot of work on improving runtime and rendering performance in .NET 5. I know there's some comments in the chat about Blazor WebAssembly that sometimes it can be a little slow compared to running like a native .NET runtime, like a .NET Core, where you have the full JIT capabilities of that runtime. Blazor WebAssembly today runs on an IL interpreter. There's no JIT. So it's not going to win any performance competitions, let's say, these days. But we've been working really hard, though, on making that better in .NET 5. And we've been doing optimizations at all layers of the stack. So the IL interpreter itself, the runtime layer, has gotten a lot of perf improvements in this in this release. And you'll start to see those in preview 8 and in future milestones that are coming in .NET 5. And then we've been doing a lot of work also at the framework library layer, like JSON handling and parsing, and also at the rendering layer. And Steve's gonna share all the details about that. And then we have a whole slew of features that we're going to be showing you many of these today. We've been working on CSS isolation. That should be coming in preview 8. Making it so you don't have to write as much JavaScript in a Blazor app is a big theme for .NET 5. So we're adding APIs like making it really easy for you to set the UI focus, giving you ways to influence the HTML head of your page, like setting the title, the metadata, meta tags, the link tags, all through Blazor's component model, so you don't have to drop the JavaScript for those things. We're giving you a built-in input radio component so that you have that out of the box for doing forms-based development. We're also shipping the protected browser storage library that Steve had put out as an initial experiment. We're putting that effectively in the box for .NET 5. Other things that we're doing, lazy loading, we're adding some basic infrastructure to make it possible for you to delay loading parts of your app for the initial load. Like if you have a large app and you want to sort of segment it into different areas that get lazy loading, we're adding the low-level infrastructure to make that possible so you don't have to load all the assemblies all at once. And we are doing some work also on the dev experience, like that interactive flow where you want to edit your code and see the changes in the browser as quickly as possible. We're making some improvements to .NET Watch and adding some auto refresh functionality in preview 8, and we'll be showing that as well. But of course, it's much more fun to actually see the demo. So instead of me just talking about the features, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, and he's going to start us off, I believe, by showing some CSS isolation.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's do this. So let me know when you see that.
I'm still waiting
Is
for
it
it.
up?
Yeah, I don't see your screen yet. So have you done share screen through the...
Oh, sorry. First time I've used this particular
Yeah.
screen sharing mechanism. Hopefully this time you
There,
see it.
okay.
You see it?
Whoop.
All right. Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. All right.
Beautiful.
Okay. Right then. So this is the issue where people asked for CSS isolation. And as you can see from this huge slew of upvotes, that this was a very commonly requested feature. So not surprisingly, we want to give the community what is being asked for. So that's what we've been working on. Now, I'm just going to turn off my camera just because my laptop's about 5 times faster when that's not running. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a demo of that now. Okay, so I've got a Blazor application here. I've got both server and WebAssembly variants of Blazor in this solution. But the feature I'm showing you now works identically across server and WebAssembly. So that doesn't really matter which one of the two we're using. Okay, so this is the default project template. I'm sure you've all seen this many times before, and it's really boring seeing these same purple and blue styles over and over again. So how about we add some novel styling into this web page? Well, I'll start by doing it without CSS isolation so you can remember what the experience has been like traditionally up until this point. So if I want to add some styles for this weather forecast table, the traditional way to do it would be to go to the source code for that, and they would say, okay, well, I only want to style this one table, not all the tables, so I better give it a unique class. And I'll call it weather table, just so that we've got a unique class for it. And then I'll go to my global site.css file, and I will just start typing out some CSS that goes in there. And I've prepared a little bit already, so let's just dump that straight in there. So we've now got this weather table rule here with various borders and background colors and stuff. Same for the heading and for the alternate table rows. All right, so that's the traditional way of styling your Blazor application. And it's a little bit frustrating to have to do it that way because we're just combining all these many different concepts all into a single site.css file, which is a little bit annoying. Also annoying is how long my laptop is taking to rebuild at the moment. Normally that's completely instant, but I think being on this stream is slowing me down a little bit.
Streaming does consume a lot of the machine resources, unfortunately.
All right, well, anyway, it did it. And now I can go back to my browser and I can reload. And you'll see we've now got this alternate styling for that table. Okay, so it works. But like I said, I don't really like the fact that I'm having to dump everything in one big CSS file. So let's get rid of that for a minute. We'll take it back out of there and I'll reload and we'll just check that that style goes away. Now let's have a look at the new way of doing this with CSS isolation. I'm going to add a new style file that is specific to this fetch data page, because the fetch data page is the one that contains the grid, this one here, that contains the grid, and I want to add some styles that apply just to that individual Razor component. So I'm going to add a new item, and I'm going to choose a CSS file. Here it comes. And where is it? Style sheet. Here we go. And I'm going to call it fetchdata.razor.css. Okay, so it's a special naming convention that means that we will apply these styles only to that component. And I'll start just by dumping in exactly the same styles that I had before. So let's see if that works, shall we? Now notice that I didn't actually manually reference this CSS file in my page anywhere. I've just got the file in my project, and the intention is by following this naming convention, the file is going to show up automatically. So we'll wait for that to rebuild, and then I'll come back and reload in the browser. What we should see now is that my green table should come back momentarily. There we go. Okay, so you can see that the styling has come back, and that's one of the first benefits that we get with CSS isolation is that we don't have to dump all of the styles into one big file. We can split it up into as many files as we want, and they all will get combined together without us even having to reference them. Okay, another thing that we can do is we don't have to necessarily make up all these custom class names anymore, because the styles in that CSS file will only be applied to this component anyway. So I could get rid of this weather table class from my sources there, and I could go back here and I could say, all right, I don't need to qualify that with weather table anymore. I don't need to qualify this with weather table, and I don't need that either, but I do need some name for it. So let's say we'll just match all the tables in the component there. Now, let's see if that still works. Just wait for this build to go through. It is honestly astonishing what level of overhead is involved in streaming.
Yeah.
I think we should all start the fund to get Steve a second machine for streaming or something.
I'm actually running an extremely expensive process in the background just to make it look much slower than it really is, justify getting a new laptop. But it is coming.
Wow, yeah.
Eventually. So did we tell you about the great work we did on making the build process faster? And
I know. The builds are faster, but I have seen the same thing on my machine when I was trying to do build and rebuilding. It's slower when StreamYard is running.
Right, here we go. So
I'm really excited. If I can help kill time for you just a second, this looks awesome because like you're saying, the whole thing about having, just as you build up more components too, right? This allows you to keep stuff kind of together, like and potentially reuse and share those components in a more contained way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so my table came back up and you'll see that it still worked, which is not surprising because now you can see that I'm matching all the tables, right? Now, maybe if you didn't realize that this was isolated, you would look at this and say, hey, this is a terrible thing that you've just done here because you've now just interfered with the styling for every single table in the entire application. But that's not the case because these styles are isolated. So to prove that, let's have a go at styling this header element here. And I'm not going to give any special classes to it or anything. You'll see that inside my fetch data page, we've got this H1 element up there at the top with the title. Similarly, in the counter page, we've got an H1 element and the same in the home page as well. So I want to add some styling for H1s, but only in the fetch data case. So I'm going to drop in a little bit of extra styling now, and I'll get that building before I explain it. All right, so I'm going to make this look way classier. As you can see, I've picked one of my favorite fonts, and I've applied a little bit of an animation to that. And we will see, does this style apply just to the H1 inside my component, or does it apply to all the H1s in the whole application? So let's have a look. When we get back to the fetch data page, we should see
this is really good for suspense.
I know. Yay! All right, great.
So, and it's got the wobble.
I don't know if the streaming is smooth here, but at my end, this is extremely classy. You might not be able to see just how sophisticated and beautiful it looks, but it does look great. But if I go over to a different page, you'll see that the styles are not applied because it's isolated to the individual component. The way that works is done at build time. If I have a look at the contents of the DOM, then we will be able to see that the Razor compiler has generated an extra magic attribute on all the elements that are produced by a given component, which I will show you. Right, you can see, I don't know if the text is too small, but you can see these crazy looking attributes, okay? So this only applies on components that have got scoped CSS, and that is matched up to your CSS files, and that prevents your styles from leaking out of your component.
That's interesting. So that is not, I would have thought it would use a class or something. It would set a class or whatever, but it actually, it's just an attribute.
Yeah, that's right. So we've actually basically ripped off this mechanism from Vue because it's proved very successful in Vue, and we've got pretty much identical feature set when it comes to scoping CSS. So we know that it's going to be sufficient for people's needs. Okay, so I'm not going to show it, but you can trust me that this works great with Razor class libraries as well. So if you've got a component in a Razor class library that contains its own scoped CSS, then whenever people use that component, its styles will come with it, and the person consuming that class library doesn't have to go and add any extra CSS files to their page or anything like that.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, so that's scoped CSS, and yeah, that's all.
If we have a few questions in the chat about this feature, could we answer them while they're hot?
Yeah.
So someone is asking, obviously we're just clarifying, this is in .NET 5, and is this going to be in the next preview?
Yes, it's in Preview 8.
Preview 8, great. Someone's asking about support and integration with other preprocessors.
Yeah, all right, cool. So let me do a demo then. So let's imagine that we want to create a scoped Sass file instead of a scoped CSS file. Right, so I've got my counter here, and let's say I want to use some Sass for that H1 element there. So I'm going to add a new item in here, add new item. And eventually, I'm going to pick a Sass file, okay? And I'm going to use the same naming convention as before. So counter.razor.scss. All right, and I'm going to drop in some Sass stuff there. Now, out of the box, we do not have any Sass support. So if I build and run this now, this style will not apply. So as you can probably guess, even if you haven't used Sass before, this is defining this variable, which is red, and it's going to set the H1 to red. Let's just give it a different color, actually, to not be the same as the one on the fetch data page. All right. Now, we don't have support for Sass by default, but this is a really extensible system. So I could use various third-party Sass mechanisms, and they will just integrate with this cleanly. And I tried this out earlier. The very first one that I tried was this thing called delegate.sassbuilder. So I'm adding that to my project now. You can use the NuGet manage dialog thing if you like going through the GUI for that. So that is being added to my project slowly, but it is. And what that's going to do is it's going to find all the SCSS files, and it's going to see whenever you change them. And each time you do a build after changing one of the SCSS files, it will generate the corresponding .css file. And that will then just plug directly into the existing CSS isolation mechanism. And then you will have the scoped styling applied to your CSS. So let's check that out.
That's very cool. Clarifying question on that. So is that is that working so seamlessly because they're both in MS Build? Or if I was to use Webpack for the pre-processing and then just rely on Blazor's inherent, whatever it's doing for its component level isolation, is that all just going to work seamlessly? Or do I have to think about ordering and stuff like that and who's changing what when to get this seamlessly working during inner loop dev versus when I build and publish, etc.?
Yeah, well, you do have to worry about ordering, but it should be a very low level of worrying on the scale of all human worrying, because the only thing you need to be concerned about is, does the CSS file get written before the .NET build runs? Okay. And if you're using something like Webpack Watch, then it's going to run that every single time you save an SCSS file, and so it's always going to have done it before you build. Anyway, let's just see if that works, shall we? We'll reload here, and then we'll see if the title of counter goes green, and it does. So we've just integrated Sass with our scoped CSS, and you'll see, of course, that this other title doesn't go green because it's still scoped, even though it's Sass. Cool. So there you go.
The next question that everyone is asking is, can I do this with JavaScript/TypeScript for cases where I need to have a component have a little bit of script?
Yeah, so that's another issue that's on our backlog. We really want to get that in time for .NET 5. Our super intern McKinnon is taking the lead on that, and we are very hopeful that we will have a feature that is like that. It's not going to be quite the same. It's not going to be based on this naming convention. That's something that we might add in the future, but it's a whole other discussion that maybe we won't get into right now. But there will hopefully in .NET 5 be a way of loading isolated JavaScript modules. So if you wanted to, you could have one per component.
No pressure, McKinnon.
Okay,
Wow.
so that's all for CSS isolation. Do you want me to move on to my next topic, or is someone else?
Go ahead. We're doing perf next.
All right, okay. Right. So the other area that I've been focusing on quite a bit lately, let me turn on my camera now. All right, cool. Right, so the other area that I've been focusing on lately, and various other people have been focusing on, is WebAssembly performance. We know that is one of the biggest limiting factors with Blazor WebAssembly in 3.2. Certainly people have been very successful deploying production apps with Blazor WebAssembly in 3.2, but there are certain kinds of UI that you can build where if you don't really know what you're doing, you'll quickly run into struggles with that. So we've been working hard to try and expand the capabilities of the system a little bit. So to give you an overview of where we are with this, the amount of performance gains you can expect between 3x and 5.0 depend on what kind of code you're writing. If you're writing completely arbitrary code that's got nothing to do with Blazor or JSON processing, then on average, we're seeing about 30% gains. And that is not well, it's mostly to do with the change that Dan mentioned earlier, how we've moved from the system libraries coming from the Mono implementation to the CoreFX implementation. So that's shared with .NET Core in general. And so things like dictionaries and string comparisons and such are a lot faster, also because of some runtime changes. And on average, this tends to average out at about 30% gains we see in the kind of things we've been measuring. When it comes to JSON serialization and deserialization, we're getting some bigger wins than that. And that is because we've really been profiling this scenario and putting some specific optimizations in the interpreter that we're running on WebAssembly there. So generally, we're seeing about 2 times faster compared with 3x. And then when it comes to Blazor component rendering, we're getting bigger gains still, between about 2 and 4 times faster, depending on what type of components you're rendering. And that's because we've got all the same benefits of moving to the new CoreFX base class library, as well as some interpreter optimizations, as well as some optimizations we've done inside Blazor's renderer as well. Now, the primary scenarios that we've been looking at optimizing for component rendering are to do with grids. We regard grids as being quite representative of the sort of really intense thing that people do in the real world, because you just end up with a lot of stuff on the screen at once if you've got a really large grid. So the benchmarks that we've been focusing on optimizing for are a set of different 20 by 200 grids. We've got these 3 scenarios. We've got one scenario called fast grid, which is a really optimized grid. We've got plain table, which is a kind of average case that we think represents pretty real world code that most people would write. And then we've got this complex table one, which is just sort of outrageously unoptimized, where we've just thrown all kinds of unnecessary features in just to slow things down, even though you would not do that normally. And as you can see, the gains that we've had when we went up to preview 8 were pretty substantial. We've got some more gains that we expect to make in the release candidate 1 release. And this is, you can see the numbers there between like 2 and 3x-ish. There are some scenarios where it can get higher still, which is why I said up to 4 times. Now, I'm just going to show you how we actually compute these numbers, because I want to be fairly precise about this so people get the right expectations of things. To actually measure the performance of those grids, we have this performance benchmarking tool built into the ASP.NET Core repo, and you can go and build that and run it yourself if you want to. And you can see it measures the timings for all these different scenarios. And we've got those 3 different grid scenarios that I mentioned just there, and I can start running them, but you know what my laptop's doing right now, and the numbers will come out horrifically, so I'm not actually even going to run them. But if I go into this view benchmark app, then you can see these are these actual grids here. So this is the fast grid one here, which is a 20 by 200 grid. And you can see that the amount of time that it takes to switch pages is pretty bad when I'm doing the streaming, but it's on the order of about 50 milliseconds when I'm not. And to give you even more clarity about that, I'm actually going to show you another grid scenario, the sort of thing that you might well write yourself. And then we'll look at what sort of speeds we're getting out of that and how we can make it substantially faster still if you make some small changes to your code. So this is a WebAssembly app that I'm running right now. And this has got some grids in it. And the grid that I'm showing you here is a grid of people, and it's got 10,000 people in an in-memory collection here. And you can see here's my grid. And it's a bit of an interactive grid because I've got various things in here that I can do. So I can click on some rows to select and highlight them, and I can edit people's date of birth. So this person who was 86 years old before, I'm going to change their date of birth to today, and you can see their age changes to 0 and so on. And then I can move around between pages, and it's all very instant because I'm only showing 20 rows at once. So you'd expect it to be instant, but all the interactivity is still there. When I come back to this first page, my selections are all still there and so on. Now, if you were in on Blazor 3.2, you probably wouldn't want to have too many rows in each page because you may start to see some performance degradation when you get above sort of like 50 or so rows. But because of many of the improvements that we've done in the 5.0 release, I can come into my source code here and I can change the number of rows per page to a much higher number. So I'm going to change this to 100. You can see the actual implementation of my grid is very straightforward. It's just literally an HTML table that I'm looping over. You could do much more sophisticated things, but I have got things like binding and such in line inside my grid there. So let's rebuild that with the 100 rows per page, and we'll just check what kind of performance we get to experience from that now. So I'll reload. I'll try and reload. Okay. All right. So by the time my browser actually wakes up, then we should see that it's all reasonably interactive. If I click on this grid here, well, it is about maybe 10 times slower than normal because of the streaming. But under normal circumstances, you would not perceive any delay whatsoever when clicking through from one page to another. Although at the moment I do see about 300 milliseconds. But normally, yeah, we would see probably on the order of about 30 or so milliseconds for those actions. Now, what happens if I try to go onto this all page? Well, what it's going to try to do is render the same 10,000 people, but without splitting it up into pages. It's going to just try and dump all of them onto the screen at once, which is going to be pretty catastrophic for performance. So I've clicked on the all link there, and I'm waiting, and I'm still waiting. This is all happening client side, and this is just the amount of time that it's taking to actually generate this 10,000 person grid, which is a really, really long time. Normally, I'd expect this to take maybe about 1 second, maybe 2 seconds at the outside on my laptop. But, because of conditions on my laptop, we're getting a very serious issue. But the good news is there is an almost magic solution for this by which we can make it pretty much instant, even when we're showing a 10,000 person grid, which is very exciting and cool. And I'm going to show it to you in a little bit, but I'm not going to show it to you right now. I want the suspense to build up, and I'm going to let McKinnon do some of his demos where he's going to introduce the feature that makes this possible. And then I'm going to come back and show you how fast my 10,000 person grid is after we use this feature, the same grid that would not even render before using that feature. So I'm going to hand over now.
That is a cliffhanger. All right, McKinnon, your screen is up.
Okay, so the feature that Steve was talking about is something that I've been working on as part of my internship, and that is virtualization support in Blazor. So what that means, for those of you who aren't familiar, is if we wanted to render 10,000 elements, instead of actually displaying all 10,000 in the DOM, we can only render the visible ones. So maybe, 20, depending on how many the visible range can hold. So the way I've done that is through this virtualization component, or this virtualized component. And there are a few different ways to use it. One way is to provide a list of items that are already in memory. So in this case, I'm kind of building off of the weather forecast example. When you first create a new Blazor template, I know 10,000 forecast doesn't really make sense because we don't know the forecast 5 days in the future, but for the sake of demo. So you can provide an item source. In this case, it's that forecast array. And then in the body or in the child content, you just specify what each item in the list should look like. So the way that looks is it's this table on the left here, and I can scroll through it, and it is actually lagging a little bit because of the stream, but the elements in the list update pretty quickly, and I can scroll like instantly through the list, and there's no really kind of a sluggish experience that comes with it. So that's one way to use virtualization. Another way is, let's say you're fetching your sources from some sort of remote source, like a database or something. You probably don't want to fetch them all at once if you have something like 10,000 elements, because that's just a lot to load. So maybe you want to load them in chunks. And to do that, you'd use an items provider, which is this parameter right here. And it's essentially just a function that defines how to load items asynchronously. So I have this load forecast method here that just takes a request that contains information like what's the start index of the item you're trying to fetch, and how many items do you need to fetch in order to fill the visible range. And then you just return the forecast that you fetched, as well as what you know to be the total item count, so that the visible range so that the scroll range looks close to what it actually would be if all the items were there. Another thing you get if you use the items provider is this placeholder template, which defines how items look if they have not yet loaded. So that's this middle table here. So if I scroll down, you can see there's a little loading template that refreshes when the loading completes.
Nice.
So one thing to note is that by default, only the visible items are contained in memory, which is great for memory, I guess, for performance. But if I were to scroll back up, I would have to load those items again. This behavior is customizable if you just change your items provider to cache already loaded items itself. So that's what the table on the right here does. So if I scroll down, you can see it's loading the items as it was before. But if I scroll back up, it doesn't have to reload them. So the behavior of how scrolling works is very customizable based off what your needs are. So that's pretty much it for virtualization. I think Steve had some more things to say about how that impacts performance. So I'll hand it back off to him.
Does that fix your problem, Steve? Does that help you?
Let's find out, shall we? Let's find out. Tell me if you see my screen again.
I don't know if you can see the chat, McKinnon, but people are pretty impressed that the intern churned that out. It's
awesome.
pretty great.
I actually don't have the chat open, but I'll be happy to look at it after this.
All right, Steve, you're up. Your screen is shared.
Right. Okay, hold on.
10,000 people, a city.
All right. So let's see what I've done in my sources while McKinnon was there. So on the grid before, I had, in fact, I can show you the diff inside here. If it would update. Here we go. Right. Look how slow GitHub for Windows is. See, it's not just Blazor, it's everything on my machine. Right, here we go. So this is the change that I've made while McKinnon was talking. It's not a big change. I've replaced this for each loop here with the use of the virtualize component. That's literally it, because the virtualize is like a special for each that only includes the items that are visible on the screen. And as a result,
looks so pretty. I'd use that just to make my code look prettier. Yeah. Like get rid of that for each block there. Yep.
Yep. All right. So now the effect of doing that, if I go away back to the home, right? Now remember, I couldn't even get to all before because it literally crashed my browser. Whereas now, if I go there, then I'm just here. Like if under normal circumstances, that would be absolutely instant. In this case, we've got a delay of about, don't know, a few hundred milliseconds or so, but it's there. And I can literally scroll through all 10,000 items absolutely trivially. And I can, because it's independent of the number of items in the underlying set, I could change that to be, a 100,000 or 1 million items in the set, and it would have absolutely no impact on the performance at all because we're only paying to get the sort of 20 or so items that are on the screen at the time. So that's that. Well done, McKinnon.
Very nice. Very nice.
This is amazing.
Thank you.
Now you might think that would be all that like McKinnon would have done while he's on his internship, right? Like that's a huge feature. It's going to be super valuable, I think. But McKinnon, do you have some more stuff to show us?
I do, yeah. If you want to switch back to my screen. Okay, so another feature, well, it was more kind of taking what Steve had done with protected browser storage and moving it into ASP.NET Core, or into Blazor. But another thing I've been kind of polishing up is a state management feature for Blazor Server, and that is, as I just mentioned, protected browser storage. So this allows you to access and mutate local storage and session storage in your browser when using Blazor Server, and it goes through ASP.NET's data protection API, basically. So this is kind of building off of the kind of simple increment count sample when you create a Blazor application. But it just saves in local storage and session storage. There's really not much to show here, I guess, except to prove that it actually is using local and session storage. I'll open a new tab. And as you can see, the local count has persisted because that stays until you tell it to go away. And session count has been reset because we opened a new tab. So the way you use it is pretty simple. You can just inject the protected local storage and protected session storage as services. And you can call set async, get async, and delete async to mutate those stores or access them. And you can also provide a purpose string, so you can scope data to a specific user, for example. So that's another kind of nice little feature that has.
So this is when you want to save state from like a Blazor server app, and you also want to protect it so you to make sure that it can't be tampered with, right? Like you're going to put state in the user's browser, and you want to make sure that that's the state that you actually put there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I'm doing that, what's the smart way for me to synchronize things back and forth? Would I basically just override it, like if I'm pulling new stuff? I realize that's a separate question. I'm just wondering if you ran into that kind of thing as you were testing or whatever.
Yeah, so I guess if I understand your question right, what I have here is just after the first render, I'm just calling this function or these two functions to update the count to what it was previously. And then after that, when you update, you can just, well, here's the update functions right here. So it just calls get async on these two keys, updates the local state, I guess. And then when you make changes, then it just does set async. And then afterward, just to show that it's actually working, I'm doing updates after it, so it uses the correct counts, I guess. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, it does. I mean, here you're just saving an int locally, right? So I guess I'm thinking more towards if you were actually persisting like the amount of data like that was in that grid, right? Or a huge chunk of JSON or something. And probably in that case, I'd just blow it out and overwrite it.
You know? Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe retrieve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so cool. Thanks. Yeah, wow. So we have some other features as well, or I have some other features that I'm working on. One is the input file component, and this is something that's still a work in progress, so it's not totally done yet. But it essentially wraps the HTML input element when you have the type set to file. And the way that works is you just create an input file, specify this on change handler, and that gives you a list of files that you've uploaded. In this case, I've disabled having multiple file uploads, so it's just one file. And then how this works is you get the file as a .NET stream. So it's basically a really easy way to access like file information from users' browser in the form of a .NET stream. So in this case, I'm just accessing image file.data and then copying it to a memory stream, converting it to a base64 string so I can render it as an image in the page. There's also a nice helper function that allows you to convert between image formats and specify like a maximum resolution. So if you had like a website where, let's say a user was uploading a profile picture, but you didn't want them to upload an 8K background image as the profile picture, you could prevent them from doing that. So the way this looks is I'll just upload a file. In this case, I do happen to have an 8K background image, so I'll upload that. And there it is. There's also this callback on.
That's nice. Uh-oh, did we just lose McKinnon?
Uh-oh.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Too awesome. He was showing off too much.
Oh, man.
He burned through his internet, apparently.
Yeah, it exploded. He broke the internet.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. That is super cool. I love these input file components, or just input components in general. That was something I was slow to pick up on, but in developing applications, it's great that I can use my HTML primitives and stuff, but using the full, all these input components is really helpful. McKinnon, looks like you're back.
Oh, yeah, I think so. My computer lagged out a little bit, but I think, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we saw the image upload, and we were like, that was great. And then I think you kind of stalled out on us there. So whatever you said after that, we didn't hear.
All right. So I was basically just talking about there's also this callback on data read, and it gets called every time you upload like a new chunk of data. So you can have things like a percentage like progress for how far the image upload is or the file upload is. So that's that feature.
So you can do progress.
Work in progress. Hopefully.
Yeah. So when you were uploading that file, we saw that progress upload percent that was coming from that then.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
So another feature I've added is influencing the HTML head from Blazor. So previously, in order to do this, you would have had to do JavaScript interop, but now you can just basically write these like pseudo elements in your code. So for an example, let's say I had a website where I wanted it so that if there's an unread notification, the title changes and the icon changes in your website. So previously, I would have had to, again, do JavaScript interop to make that work. Now I can just render a title and link component as I would if I was just putting them directly into the head. So I can just set the title with updated title and change the link to link a new icon. So in this case, I'll just go trigger notification. And as you can see, I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's a little one right there and the title has changed. So
got a little bang on it, yeah.
Yeah. And this feature isn't only nice because it reduces the amount of JavaScript you have to write, but it's also nice because it works with pre-rendering. So like, let's say you had metadata that you wanted to maybe change depending on how components were rendered. That will now work if an SEO engine tries to fetch that. So that's another really nice feature.
Yeah.
So manipulation of the head is also super important from my investigation previously to work with web analytics frameworks like Application Insights and other things, because a lot of them will use the page title for SPA-based frameworks in order to differentiate between different pages when they're counting page views. Like typically it would use the URL as part of detecting the HTTP requests going on in the browser or the full navigations. But when using push state, I've noticed, like certainly App Insights and some of the others, they rely on the page title to differentiate when it comes to reporting. And so if you're not changing the page title as part of your page navigation, then that becomes a little hard to tell which page was viewed. We don't automatically, though, have any type of automatic page titling based on routing, correct? Like you still have to set the title yourself on every page.
Right, you do.
Okay.
That's great.
So that might be interesting for someone to come up with. I've seen some efforts on that in the past before we had this support where you had to do JS interop, but it'd be nice if there was like a default way we could just set the title for you based on the file name or the component name or something, and then you could just override it if you set a title or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be really exciting.
There's a question in the chat also if it would work with like link previews and social media. A lot of that stuff's based on setting stuff in the head. I'd assume it's the same sort of thing, right?
It should work, yeah. We do require that. Okay, so the way this works, this is getting a little bit into implementation, but there's actually a little bit of JavaScript that's included in the response that has to get run in order for the changes to apply. So as long as that JavaScript is run, which like most SEO engines, for instance, do that, so it should work. So as long as that JavaScript is run, then the changes should be applied. So
wow,
yeah. Yeah, so that's that feature. The next one is...
Oh, wait, there's more.
Okay.
It's like the McKinnon show.
I don't have the chat open, so I can't see what people are saying. Sorry.
You're doing great.
Slightly happy about all these features. People are ecstatic. This is awesome. It's very cool. Yeah.
Are there any other questions about that, or should I continue?
Keep going.
Show input radio.
All right, so I'm actually on this focusing without JS. This is a pretty small feature, but if you have an element reference, you can now call focus async to bring focus to that feature, focus to the element. And so in this case, I just have an element reference to this input, and I'm calling input.focus async when the button next to it is clicked. So I can just click that and it brings focus to it. It's pretty simple, but this feature does lay the groundwork for other features kind of like it. So if you have a suggestion for a feature that that's similar to focus async that would currently require a JavaScript interrupt, but you don't want it to, then you could feel free to submit an issue for that, and then we could potentially add that in. So that's that.
Nice.
And then finally, the input radio component. This is essentially just a wrapper for the HTML input radio that works with existing Blazor form validation.
I just wrote this recently. It was a lot of code, or it was more code than I was hoping for. And I was like, where's my input radio? So thank you.
Right. Yeah. So if I, like, for instance, go ahead and submit an empty form, you can see the validation styling is similar on the input radio for how it would be with existing components like the input text component. So I'll go ahead and fill this out and then pick an option. And then since the first two options clearly aren't correct, only the third one yields a valid result that you can submit. So yep, that's pretty much what I've done so far. I'm halfway through my internship. I hope to get more done by the time I'm done.
Yeah, he's not even done yet. Yeah, that's great. Wow. McKinnon, that is a fantastic set of features. Thank you for showing those off. Yeah.
There's one person in the chat that is like, I'm building an app. Like as you're showing each of these features, they're like, oh, I'm working on file upload now, and I'm working on this right now, and wow, oh great. So they said he said, oh man, is it my birthday? All these are awesome presents.
That's so funny. That reaction rings so true to me. I remember back when ASP.NET 2, this is how old I am, back when ASP.NET 2 was doing the rounds of previews, and I went to some in-person preview in Australia, and I was working on ASP.NET 1.1 side, and they demoed like all the login controls and the user management controls. I was like, oh my Lord, I've been building all this stuff myself, and now it's literally no code. It's like 40 characters, and you can log into your site. That's exactly what this feeling is. It's like, I don't know, 17 years later, and we're giving that feeling to people again. So,
wow.
Well, I know we're going long here, but we still have two more.
Two more. Yep.
We still got Safia. Thank you, McKinnon. That was amazing. Safia, do you want to show us some lazy loading?
Yeah. Do you want to hop over to my screen?
All
right, let's do that. Cool. So for this demo, I'm going to switch into an alternate personality. I'm a developer for this company called Frankie's Fruit Stands. And we produce a mobile application for sales associates who sit by the side of the road in fruit vendors and sell produce. And so what these sales associates do is they log in at the beginning of the day, they pop open this app, they go to the sales register. We've got different kinds of produce that we have. They can sell it throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, we have a sales dashboard where they can take a look at their sales throughout the day and then send a sales report off to the sales manager. As you can see, fantastic UI UX here. I should have taken way more advantage of Steve's CSS isolation feature. So I'm starting to get reports from these sales associates that at the beginning of the day, it takes the app an awful long time to load, and they're not sure why. So I've started to investigate this. So I'm going to pop open my trusty DevTools. And I've got developer instance of the application going. So I see here that without linking, I'm loading 13 megabytes of resources. That's a little suspicious. Let's see if we can
But this was without
narrow
linking,
down what's causing
So
that.
this is not stripped. So if anyone is freaking out about that number as well, like that number is only the number when you're in dev and we're not running the linker and pulling out all the unused assemblies and all the unused code. So that's why that number is really big. We optimize for inner loop during dev as opposed to download size. But when you publish it, that would go way down.
Yeah, so that's a good thing to point out about lazy loading is this is a feature you can use in conjunction with compression, with linking, and a lot of the other features that we have to help you build performant and small Blazor WebAssembly applications. So it doesn't stand on its own. It's like standing on the shoulders of giants. So cool. If I sort by assembly size, I'm going to see here that there's two big culprits. One of them is iTechSharp and the other is Bouncy Castle Crypto. As a developer, I happen to know these are coming from the dependency that I've taken for generating PDFs on the client for sending the sales report. And I mentioned earlier, our sales associates really only fire off these sales reports at the end of the day. So I don't need to load it if they're just on the sales register with customers or if they're filling out their timesheets. So let's close this out and let's see if we can hop over to my Blazor WebAssembly application and fix that. Cool. So now I'm in my VS Code session. I've got my Blazor WebAssembly application open. I'm going to go ahead and open my project file.
I see this coloring stuff. It reminds me of like an old school Mac or something with like the tan grayscale.
Yeah.
Oh, this is totally a symptom of the fact that it's actually sunny in Washington State for the first time. So I've got a lot of sun in my apartment, and I'm having to use light themes for once instead of dark themes. So I start by going into my project file, and I'm going to add a new item group that contains all of the assemblies that I want to be lazily loaded. And here it's the two that I've identified as my culprits after doing my investigation in Browser DevTools. Cool. I'm going to stop my running server here. Now I'm going to hop over to my applications router, which is an app.razor. And I see here that I've got my router component, and I've got an onNavigate async callback that I've already written up here. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and invoke this onNavigate async callback in my router. And this callback is going to be invoked whenever a navigation event happens and the location that the user is on changes. We'll be able to figure out if the user is visiting their stats reporting page, and if so, use our lazy loading service to load those assemblies dynamically. Here, I'm just passing it a simple string of the assemblies that need to be loaded. So let's actually see this in action now that we've marked our assemblies as lazy loaded and written up our code in our router component. So I'm going to run my Blazor app again. And I'm going to pop open my...
There it goes.
Yep. Cool. So I'm going to pop open my editor here. I've opened the application. The first thing you're going to see here is, remember again, we're running in development mode without linking. But we've loaded 9.9 megabytes of resources as opposed to the 13 we've had before. So we were able to shave off about 4 megabytes in development mode without linking for this scenario. And that's because we haven't visited the sales dashboard yet. So our sales associates can go to the register, they can ring up clients, do all of that fun stuff. And then at the end of the day, they can go to the sales dashboard. And we'll notice here that the assemblies will be loaded dynamically or deferred when they visit that route, and the page will still be able to function as normal so they can look at the visualization, zoom out if need be, and all of that good stuff. So that's the Blazor WebAssembly lazy loading feature. As mentioned before, we provide all of the low-level infrastructure you need so you can build on top of this feature in your application or in your framework libraries if you want to extend on top of it. And it'll be documented fully as part of Preview 8. So take a look at the docs. We've got lots of information written up on how to use it, different scenarios, and things like that. That's lazy loading.
Yeah, so this is kind of, I think of it as a little bit lower level abstractions, right? Like normally your entire app would be downloaded, right? Like everything that the build system found in terms of dependencies, all that stuff would get loaded with the app as sort of one chunk in a Blazor WebAssembly app. This gives you the ability to sort of knock out dependencies and say, don't load these yet. Like I don't need them initially. And then in the router, you can say, okay, but if you navigate here, now go ahead. We give you a service that lets you then dynamically load those assemblies into the runtime so that you can then use that functionality.
Yeah, and you can actually use this, as mentioned, if you're wanting to defer lazy loading. If you know a particular set of large components is going to be loaded, it's super customizable for you to build on top of.
All right, cool. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions. One was if you could load something that wasn't defined as part of your project. So say, for instance, you uploaded DLL and want to load it as a plugin, that kind of thing. Is there a way to do that?
No, so the assembly that you use still has to be referenced from within the project. The reason being is that if it's not, it's going to be removed by the linker. So it'll still have to be used within your application. It just won't be loaded until it's actually used by a page or component.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a full dynamic plugin system. It's just a way to optimize your download size effectively of the application by lazy loading certain dependencies.
That makes sense. Okay, and there was one other question. I've just rushed through this because I know we have other stuff to show, but why you need to specify .dll suffix in on navigate async, but you don't need to in the MS build properties?
So we passed the list of assembly names directly to the lazy loading service. Wow. I was on the other tab and it was totally lagging. So we handle concatenating the DLL name onto the include that you provide in the project file, but not in the invocation. That's actually a good piece of feedback to bring if you want to open it up as an issue of not including the DLL extension in both. I'm having a super trippy moment because at the same time that you asked that question, John, someone internal at the company sent that over Teams. So I'm just I was like, whoa.
That's funny.
So yeah, this is a great way, great time to point out that this feature will be released in Preview 8. Take a look, give it a spin, try it out, and please do share your feedback on everything from the API to things that you would like to see improved. Definitely want to hear it.
Very cool.
All right, Dan. I've got one more thing. Can you switch it over to my machine if you would be so kind? All right, cool. So the last thing I wanted to show was just a little development experience improvement that we've been working on. Damien's been working pretty hard on this in conjunction with the Blazor team. So I've got a Blazor application open here in Visual Studio Code. This is just the normal Blazor, in this case, it's a Blazor server app, Blazor server template. And I've got the terminal open at the location of this project, and I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And to run it, I'm going to use .NET Watch, which is a built-in tool to the .NET SDK for watching the files and rebuilding the app as you make code changes to your application. So I'm going to do .NET Watch run and go ahead and just hit enter and get that going. And hopefully, now this is going to be, unfortunately, the build times here are going to be a little sluggish because we're live streaming, but I'm just going to sit and wait until it's done building. And I don't know, where's that like dramatic music?
Yeah.
All right. So now first thing I want you to
buy new laptops.
Thank you, Damien. I didn't pop up the browser, like it popped up the browser for me. So that's a nice little improvement. That's actually in Preview 7. Then if you use .NET Watch, we will go ahead and launch the browser for you at the right URL so that you don't have to. Okay, so that's kind of nice. Now I'm going to go ahead into my application. I'm just going to add a little bit more excitement to my hello world. And Visual Studio Code will automatically save the file. So .NET Watch detects that, kicks off another build. Blazor server detects that the server's gone down. It's displaying a little UI to say, hey, hold on, I'm waiting to reconnect to the server after it's rebuilt and restarted again. Now, normally without streaming, this all takes about like 2 seconds or so. With streaming, it takes a little longer, but oh, the browser just refreshed for me. I didn't actually have to do anything. So this is a new feature that I like to call auto refresh. When you're using .NET Watch, we will watch for those changes, and we will insert a little bit of JavaScript into the page to handle the auto refresh of the page. If we go looking in here into the sources of this page, this is the HTML page that got downloaded, the generated HTML for the application. And down here at the bottom, you can see there's a little bit of script that's handling the refreshing of the page for you. So that's kind of nice. So if I go back to my application, let's say I add a counter component to the home page. Again, let that sit. .NET Watch is kicking off the build. This normally would take about 2 seconds, but because of the streaming, it's taking a little longer. One of the things we're actually working on really hard right now is improving the build times of Blazor WebAssembly apps so that this inner loop is more agile and more iterative in nature. So I can click on the counter now. I've got a counter. We can even change the increment amount. Let's change it to 10. Let the change happen again. I'm not refreshing the browser again. This is just me editing code, letting the browser do its thing. It'll auto refresh for me, and I see the changes. Now, this style of auto refresh is a full rebuild and rerun of the app. Let's make sure that actually worked. Yep.
It's not, well, okay, just to clarify, it's not a rebuild because we have to be careful with our terms here. This is an incremental build in the world of .NET. A rebuild is horrifically slow because it disregards anything you've done before. This is an incremental build from MS Build's point of view. And further to that, .NET Watch now can go even sort of more fine grained. So rather than just calling .NET run again every single time it sees a change, if it determines that the file changed wasn't something that would impact, for say, NuGet, it will suppress the implicit NuGet restore, which will save you an extra second or so, depending on how fast you're, about an extra minute right now, given how fast your machine is going, which obviously helps. And those are type of incremental improvements that we can make in things like .NET Watch, when they can determine, oh, the effect of this change can be suppressed because we know that there's not going to be any change there. The other thing I have to call out is that we were massively inspired by a community member who built this solution originally. Rick Strahl has the ASP.NET Core Live Reload middleware, and it did a very similar thing to what you're seeing here, but it required editing your application. You had to add a package, you had to go and then like edit your startup file, and then you would get this type of experience. We were so inspired by that I reached out to Rick and I had a quick chat with him, and they said, what if we just built this into .NET Watch and you didn't have to edit your app at all, because we can inject this stuff into the app when .NET Watch launches it. So we actually took some of Rick's code, appropriately attributed, of course. You can go and look at the copyright headers in GitHub. And then we rolled that into the .NET Watch feature so that you now just get this all part of .NET Watch. So it's a huge shout out to Rick for the original sort of heavy lifting there. And then I didn't do any coding at all. Pranav was the dev who actually rolled it all into .NET Watch. I just kept poking him saying, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Can you make it faster?
It is pretty fun. It does make development have that sort of iterative feel where you're just editing and saving and seeing the changes. The distinction I was leading towards there was this. I know some people talk about hot reload. Just to be clear, this is not hot reload in the sense that we're not taking newly built code and trying to somehow inject it into the already executing application. This is more of an auto rebuild with lots of clever optimizations in how we do the rebuild, and then auto refreshing the browser for you. Having a hot reload semantic is something that we're looking at in the .NET 6 timeframe to see if we can make this that loop even faster. But yeah, so that's something that you'll be able to try out in preview 8 of .NET 5. That's coming up really soon. I saw some questions about is .NET Watch like specific to Blazor server? No, .NET Watch is a generic tool that just watches the files and then does some command whenever the files change. In this case, I asked it to run the application. You can use .NET Watch Run with MVC apps, Razor Pages apps, Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor Server. It works for all of those applications. So this same demo works just as well with like a Razor Pages based app or a Blazor WebAssembly app. So you can use that for any of those application models. All right. So that was the yes.
There's a question about is any state maintained between these?
No, the app is being shut down and restarted, to Dan's point. So this is basically, I mean, let's be completely honest. This is the crudest form of automation, effectively, that saves you from hitting whatever keystroke you do to build your application when you've made a change, and then having to Alt-Tab over to the browser and hit F5 to refresh the page. We are automating that for you by default when using .NET Watch and this injection, which refreshes the browser. The other end of the spectrum is full hot reload, where we literally live patch changes into your running application and maintain as much state as possible based on the mechanism for doing so. But there are notches, there are click stops in between what we're doing here and full live reload that we also intend to investigate and hopefully add support for, so that you can avoid some of the other overhead, even in scenarios where we know, hey, we can't do a super hot reload in the future for this type of change, but we can just replace this part. Maybe we keep the WASM runtime booted, but we just reload the app assembly, for example, and that would save you the browser refresh and a bunch of other stuff. So there's lots of things we can do to smooth this experience out, which we fully intend on investing heavily on over the next 12 to 18 months. But this is what we've got for .NET 5 today.
Very cool.
So I just wanted to summarize the things that are still to come. Like the many of the features that we saw today are going to be in the Preview 8 release, which should be out in about 2 weeks or so for you all to play with. We're giving you the sneak preview in this community stand-up today. Things that are coming after Preview 8, like in the September timeframe or beyond, are the ones on this list that we're showing. So we are working on additional runtime and rendering performance improvements. Steve talked about those, that there are additional perf improvements that will come in the first release candidate preview that should come in September timeframe. The virtualization support that McKinnon did, that's not actually in Preview 8, so you'll only see that in the RC1 build. But as you could see, it's looking good, and you'll be able to try that out in the fall, in September. File upload is also in that same bucket. We are hoping to do JavaScript isolation. That's also post Preview 8, but it is something we're hoping to tackle. Go McKinnon. And then lastly, there are a bunch of debugging improvements that we have been working on, like improving the launch time so that when you're doing Blazor WebAssembly debugging is what this one's about, that the attach time and the launch of that experience is much faster. We're looking at adding support for a break on exceptions. We are also adding out of process support for the debug proxy. Like today, the debug proxy typically either runs in the Blazor dev server or it runs in your app, like in your ASP.NET Core application as like a piece of middleware. We're looking at taking that out of process so that we can support debugging into remote environments like code spaces, Docker, or WSL type environments. So that's something we're laying the groundwork for in .NET 5 as well. And lastly, I got to give a shout out to VS for Mac. In 8.8, they are also adding support for Blazor WebAssembly debugging. That should be coming in their Preview 2 release, I think is the preview, that the correct number. That should be out by the end of this month as well. So if you're a Mac user, you're doing Blazor WebAssembly development, you'll be able to use VS for Mac to debug your code.
So there's already... Yeah, so there's support for WebAssembly development, just not the debugging. So this
just not the F5 debugging. Yeah, like hitting breakpoints and stepping through. That's something that they have been working on and will have available in preview form shortly.
Very cool. Wow, that is a lot of stuff.
That's what we had for you today. Wow, thank you everyone who stuck it out with us. I know that went a little longer than normal, but I hope you're as excited as we are about all the goodies that are coming in .NET 5.
We did not lose anybody. In fact, it's been picking up.
We got 320 odd people watching right now. So.
Sweet.
Wow. Okay, so for people that want to keep up, there's the ASP.NET Twitter handle. There's all your handles. There's they can watch for announcements, the blog posts, anything else you want to call out, important places just to keep involved. And then also the sprints.
The sprints, yep. Look to do the monthly sprints. We'd love to get more help to add even more goodies to the release. There is still time. Just to set people's expectations that those monthly sprints, as we get to certain parts of the release cycle, obviously we have to kind of lock things down. Like we can't be adding big, riskier features later in the release. So some of those sprints may be more bug fixes. And then as we look into .NET 6, we can start looking at adding chunkier things again. But yeah, look for the Blazor sprints. Follow the ASP.NET blog and the .NET blog. That's where all the release announcements go out. And of course, join us on GitHub. Keep filing issues. Keep letting us know the things that we should be prioritizing. We do our best to do what is most useful to the Blazor community.
Wow. Well, that was amazing. Thank you to the whole team. McKinnon, those were great demos. Safia, it's amazing to see you on the team and the stuff you're kicking in. It's just cool to see the team growing and building such amazing stuff. So congrats to all of you.
Thank you. I mean, this is just a sampling of the team. We have other folks on the Blazor team and a whole set of runtime folks that supports the Blazor WebAssembly runtime and the core framework libraries. But it's great what is coming together for .NET 5.
Very cool. All right, thanks, folks. Well, so we don't have the dramatic zoom out. We do have a little thing that plays music. I probably need to set up a special animation with some sort of zoom out at some point. But here we go. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.